So this evening, we're going to speak a little bit about choice. So I think the title of this session was around the impotence of society. And I guess some of the themes that we want to talk about and cover are with regards to free will is kind of the aim or the kind of aspiration of being able to make free choices is kind of an aspiration of most kind of liberal society, right? So it's something that we believe that we have. And so I'm going to ask you some questions about what that looks like and what it means for you. And we're going to talk about what that then looks like in terms of a society. So the last couple of sessions we did were on Andrew Tate. And we talked about influence and all of those kinds of things there. And this is going to be a perspective that the Gita brings with regards to free will and what that means for us. Okay, so let's start off with this question. How would you define what is a freely made choice? How would you define that? So if I was to say to you, what does that look like? What are the parameters? What are the necessary kind of prerequisites for a choice to be classified, defined as freely made? What would you say? Doesn't have to be exhaustive, or just give me some aspects of that. Yeah.
Choice which doesn't include the influence of people or the environment.
Okay, so for those who didn't hear that, choice that doesn't include the influence of other people or the environment. Yeah, so, okay, all right. Anyone else? Yeah, at the back, just shout out.
Lack of pressure.
Lack of pressure, okay. What else?
Every decision is based upon what you want to do.
Decision is based upon what you want to do. Okay? Anything else?
Truth with some understanding of the consequences of free.
A choice which the person makes and they have to have the understanding of the consequence of that choice.
To accept, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. What are some of the, so in terms of like choice that you're living kind of day to day, what percentage of, so the question is, what percentage of the choices that you make every day do you think are freely made? Someone start us off with a number. I want a percentage of all the choices that you make, all the small, big, whatever, all the choices, right? So you get up in the morning to the time you go to sleep, all the choices. What percentage do you think are freely made? Look, I don't have the stat, okay, so you can't be wrong. So, yeah, give me 95%. 95% free, okay. Yeah. 100% free, okay.
10%.
Okay. You've gone from 95 to 100 to 10. Someone had to take the extremes. Okay. Anyone else? Are you guys really at the extremes, yeah? That's where you're at, all of you. No one's in the middle. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Casey. Okay, those are all the choices, okay? So it sounds like you have no clue. That's what it sounds like to me. When you get all the extremes and everything in the middle, like, I mean, it sounds like you don't really know. So tell me if I'm wrong. Hopefully this will make it a bit easier. What percentage of the big decisions, okay, so now ignore, do I want cornflakes or toast for breakfast? Ignore the small stuff. Now the big decisions. What am I putting on my UCAS? Am I getting married or not? Big decisions. What percentage of the big decisions are freely made?
75.
75?
I'd say 100%. but it depends on the circumstance.
Okay. Yeah.
Again, 100%, but it still depends on your definition of free.
Okay.
Did I say 65%?
Okay. So, I mean, it sounds like you guys are going higher. Is anyone at the low end here? Because you had some lows, 0, 10, right? Well, I don't even know if I want to ask you, but go ahead.
25.
25, you've gone up. Okay, but the trend is up. Is anyone who is flipped? That you've got more free will, more free choice on the smallest, or on the entirety than the bigger stuff. So the bigger stuff is more driven by external or other. No. You're all on the same page, are you? Yeah, go on.
Yes, I would agree with what you just said.
Why?
Because I think with bigger choices, there's a lot more external factors beyond our control. But with smaller choices, there's not too much that's predetermined. So like, for example, with cornflakes or Cocoa Pops, like the consequences of both and both choices don't really have too much value. So it's like 100% free. But with bigger choices, there's some predetermined factors.
Give us an example.
So like, for example, you were saying like whether to get married or not. So, for example, your parents use, if you've been watching a lot of Bollywood films or something like that.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. So there are other major influences that will come to play there versus smaller stuff which may not have the major influences, versus the other perspective, which is that actually on the bigger choices you might be more conscious about what you're doing because of the consequences are increased, and therefore you're not just going along with it. Okay, so what are some of the big choices that you think that in your life you will make? Give me the top, I don't know, 3 or 5.
What career you decide to do or what you want to
Career.
work as.
Okay, career. Okay, let's just group that as career. Okay,
Partner.
partner. Okay,
Religion or what you place faith in.
religion or what you place faith in. Okay,
Friend circle.
friend circle. Okay,
Kids.
kids. As in, to have kids or not. Yep. Anything else? Okay, so those are some of the big ones, okay? So I did look up the stat on this. I looked up the stat on religion. What percentage do you think people are making, okay, put it this way. How would you figure out whether somebody is making a free choice about the religion that they follow? How would you try and understand that? Yeah, at the back.
Ask them.
Okay, ask them. I mean, though I would suggest that you may get a not entirely unbiased view on something like religion if you just ask them. Is there something that you think may be able to get to the point of information by data as opposed to opinion?
Their enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm, okay. Yep.
It's not as much data, but it's like how much of an understanding they have of it. So
Okay.
if they understand what they're following.
Okay. Understanding, yep.
When their family might have different views compared to them.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that, Sitarani.
How much they're giving to it.
How much they're giving, okay, all right, how committed they are, yeah? Okay, so we're going to come back to the point just before. So say your point again, please.
When their family have like different views as to what they have.
Okay, so we're going to come to this mainly because the others, you could see that they are arguable, they're objective, like the actual measure is not as straightforward. So coming to your point, one of the measures that they do have looked at is, and this was in the US, so I wanted to look at the US version because liberal democracy, so if you're going to switch religion, that's an easy place to switch religion as opposed to somewhere like, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Dubai, where you land in Dubai, on the immigration counter it says apostasy is a crime punishable by death. So, I mean, like the conversion rate is probably low. Converting from one religion to another. So if you convert out of Islam, that's punishable by death. But to the point, so they did this study in the US, and it was what they looked at was what percentage population of a particular religion were not born in that religion. So somebody was making an active choice. Obviously, you have to screen out for forced conversion and coercion and all of those things. But in terms of, and they went into those questions as well. But if we just take it high level, because we ain't got time to get into the complete detail of it. But what percentage do you think of? They shared the stats on two religions, Christianity and Islam. So what percentage of Christian, and I'll tell you this, they're actually very similar percentages for both. Okay, so let's ignore the whether it's Islam or Christianity. But what percentage of those religions do you think were people, so people practicing those religions, what percentage do you think were people who were not born into that religion? 20, 30, 40. This is not an auction. Okay, 20 is the closest. It was 22%. So what does that tell you? I know you haven't seen the detail of it, but what is that on prima facie? What does it tell you? Yeah. Sorry, that was an airplane, so we missed the.
Religion is like popular, most people are born religious.
Religion is popular,
And most people are born religious.
and most people are born religious. Why did you say the first thing? Religion is popular.
Because if it wasn't, then there wouldn't be as many people that were born into religion. Like,
Oh, I see. Okay, fine. Got it. Thank you. Yep.
Being born into a religion gives you like a predisposition or a bias. So you're more likely to stay in that religion if you're born into it.
Okay, so everyone catch that. Being born into religion gives you a predisposition or bias because you're more likely to follow it.
Religion is still like a decision that people think about, like they're going to consciously make a decision on whether they wish to believe what their family believes in or whether they wish to maybe choose another path or
Yeah.
look at other paths.
So there is a significant minority, if we can call 22% a significant minority, which is active in their choice. At the back.
Yeah, it's just about active choice. Childhood is like formative years, and the formative years are being influenced by bias because their families are obviously from a certain religion.
Yeah.
So they're being brought up with a certain mindset.
Yeah.
So how much free choice they have.
So that's that 88, 78% who are not. Yeah. Okay. So what's also interesting is that those religions were not gaining. So they weren't like you had 100% and then you were going to 122% in terms of numbers. You were at 100%. You were losing the same number that you were gaining. So there was also a significant minority of people who were leaving both of those religions, and in almost equal number in terms of percentage terms. So there is something going on there. Okay. So this is the first slide. I'm going to have to speed up because we won't get through it. Okay. Is this young girl making a choice to lift this rock? Is she making, remember the first question was what defines a free choice, right? A freely made choice. Is this young girl making a freely made choice to lift this rock?
In what sense, yes, because no one is physically holding the rock to her head. So she could put it down, obviously, out of consequence, but it is a choice she could technically make.
Yeah, okay. Yep,
No, but she's being forced by that kind of situation, like in
Yeah.
or that she's going forward.
yeah, okay. So circumstance is forcing her. So it's not a physical force, but it's a circumstantial force. Okay, thank you. Yep.
On the spectrum, probably closer to force, but would that allow it to, in the split moment?
Okay, so you brought in the word spectrum, which we'll come back to in terms of what is free will and what free choice. Remember, when I asked the question earlier, you guys struggled a little bit, I think, to really define it in really clearly. And I think that part of the complexity of it is about the spectrum. And, whether something sits at the absolute end or not, which is why, your 0 or 100 responses are not as simple as you might think they are. Okay. I mean, have you ever seen a product where the person selling the product says, buy this, this is going to kill you? But that's what they're doing here, right? Because they're mandated by law to do that, because it is going to kill you. So, and yet people are still buying it. So are they buying, do people buy cigarettes out of free choice? Are they making a free choice? I mean, some of your friends probably smoke. So when you encounter that, do you feel that they're making a choice? Yes? I'm seeing nods. Anyone shaking their head? Maybe. Mostly yes, maybe. No, one saying no at the back. Why is it a no?
Just because, like, maybe at the beginning, yes, they did have the choice to begin or not begin. But after they started, once they became addicted, I don't think they have much of a choice.
Okay. So we're talking here, thank you, that's nicely put, in terms of where choice starts and then where it gets to. And that's driven by habit, right? So like when we're talking about nicotine, we're talking about addiction. So there's an addiction here. What about this? You've read some stats on social media and its impact on you guys. Is this a choice? Have you guys ever felt like, I mean, you know, whatever social media platforms you're on, when you're using your phone, when doing whatever you're doing on your phone in terms of social media, do you feel that you're always in control? Like, control is probably the wrong word, but do you always feel like that's an active choice that you're making? Do any of you ever feel like it's less than a choice? Do any of you ever feel like almost pushed towards doing it? Not even pushed, but maybe pushed or kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry? Swayed, that would be, yeah, that's a good one. That can work. Swayed, do you ever feel swayed to do that? Outside of your own volition? Yeah? No? Anyone saying no? You want to say no?
Yeah, I was saying no, but it's like, it's your own choice to keep going back onto it again and again and again.
Okay. And you feel like every time you're doing that, you're making an active choice?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. This? Choice? No choice? Something? You get the point. Free choice is not as straightforward as the question I posed right at the beginning. It's a much more complicated, nuanced question about what constitutes an expression of free will. And so let's come back to this question, and I'm going to take a poll. Actually, should we do this now? No, I'm going to come back to it. It's the same questions I asked you before. I'm going to come back to them after this. Okay, let's take a scenario, okay? So here's this person on a bike, and they see something that they like, and they have a choice ahead of them. What's the choice at this point in time? What's this person's choice at this point in time? Okay, am I going to take it or not? Steal it or not? Okay, they make a choice, all right? They decide they're going to steal it. Once they've decided that they're going to steal it, that choice of whether to steal it or not, does it exist anymore? That choice has disappeared, right? And now there's another choice, which is, am I going to confess and hand myself in, or am I going to not? Okay? So you have a choice. Do you get a guilty conscience and then decide, actually, I shouldn't have done this, and et cetera, right? They decide that they're not. So they get arrested, and they have a choice in terms of whether they're going to plead guilty or innocent. That's their choice now. The previous choices, do you see something about the previous choices? What's happening to them? What's happening to them?
They're disappearing.
Yeah, they're disappearing. So we're going to come on to something now. Here, the person's arrested, and then they have a choice about what they're going to do, whether they decide to fill out their sentence or not. Okay, what's here? Have you guys heard of degrees of freedom? Do you know what degrees of freedom are? Okay, you probably study it in one subject or another. So So the idea is that you start off in a decision tree. You've seen decision trees? Branching off, yeah, okay. So you've seen decision, so you start off at a decision tree and you've got the widest degrees of freedom because you can choose a whole bunch of stuff. But as you make your first decision, you're progressing down a particular path of that decision tree, right? So the other part of that decision tree that you've now closed off has disappeared, right? Because you can't go, well, unless you're going back up the decision tree, right? But I mean, so the point is that you're reducing your degrees of freedom as you go. And we're not always conscious of that. That one, like, when somebody makes a decision, they're not always conscious that they're not going to be able to go back to the beginning of that decision tree. It's going to take them down a certain path, and they're closing down, like, for better or for worse, we are closing down parts of the decision tree. We are reducing our degrees of freedom. So when we talk about reducing degrees of freedom, what we're saying is that you don't have absolute free will. Because absolute free will would mean you are at the top of the decision tree every single time, right? So like if I bought the ticket to go to New York and I get on the plane to New York, I don't have the decision anymore to be able to go to Bombay, right? That decision has disappeared. Now my decision is which meal do I take on the airplane? You know, see what I mean? So that's the like, it's an important thing for us to remember that as we progress down decision trees, like that, what we are blocking off and keeping open to ourselves, right? And that's how we have to, well, that's one of the things that we have to consider when we consider what is a free choice and what is free will and how much of it do we actually have. What about your opinions? Right, we talked about choices. What about your opinions? So how free are your opinions? How many of you read Animal Farm? Oh, very good. Very good. For those of you who have not read Animal Farm, that's the first thing you should do getting out of this room. I mean, it is absolutely essential reading. So in Animal Farm, I mean, so these two books, 1984 and Animal Farm, they are just, I mean, so brilliant in terms of how they express the context in which we're living in terms of, and the potential of how free will can become degraded over time and how influence arises in terms of decision making. I mean, they speak about many things, you know, I won't spoil it for you, but one of the things that it talks about is how the impotence of when people become unquestioning, when they become completely unchallenging and fully accepting of authority, the dangers of what that brings. And so the Animal Farm story, for the few of you who didn't read it, it's about how the animals club together, get rid of the farmer, and you know, and the pigs are in control. But so the pig is called Napoleon, and he is always right. So this is what the horse says, and I must work harder. So like the idea is that you just go down a certain train of thought because you're unquestioning of authority and unwilling to challenge it. And you know, one of the places where I saw this, there was a BBC radio program called Evil or Genius or something like that, Evil Genius, something like that. And they went through all of these famous people. And the two iconic people, right, like so in primary schools, or actually even in secondary school sometimes, you look, when you're studying like values or kind of people who changed the world for the better, the two iconic people are Mother Teresa and Gandhi, right? They come up as the heroes of, the emblems of kind of virtue and good character. And this radio program talks about the controversies that surrounded them. And what was interesting is that different people will see their... So, do you remember, I don't know if you've heard of some of, let's start with Gandhi, heard of some of his stuff on racism and about how he thought of black people and used words like savages, and his first accomplishment in the civil rights movement in South Africa was actually a third line, and the third line was not, so it wasn't like you know, so there were two lines, right? So there was the white line and the black line, and the Indians were part of the black line. So his accomplishment was not to make one line, it was to make 3 lines, one for the Indians, so they didn't have to stand with the black people. So, you know, and then he did this whole experiments with truth where he was, and we won't get into that, but you can read the thing if you want. But so the point being that how do you think, like, so people in India, what do they think of Gandhi? Generally, I know there are exceptions, but generally, what do people think of Gandhi? Good guy or bad guy? Good guy, right? He's a hero, he's a father of a nation, etc., etc. He couldn't do no wrong, right? His pictures everywhere, etc., even on the money notes. So, I mean, what do you think of the people, what do at least some people in Africa think of Gandhi? I mean, when that, you know, when they were tearing down the statues of the slave traders and in different parts of the world, so in some parts of Africa, they were tearing down statues of Gandhi. Because from their perspective, that's what they thought, he believed. Mother Teresa, I mean, like, you can't say anything bad about Mother Teresa, right? But, I mean, it was quite interesting what they found. So Mother Teresa in the West is like, you can't get more saintly than Mother Teresa. She's actually been made a saint, right? So Pope Francis, I think, anointed her a saint. So, but the amount of money that was brought into her institution, the amount of money that she did not spend on the care of the people in her care because she prioritized conversion to Christianity, the amount of times that, or kind of data that they're showing about how people were coerced in terms of their conversion to Christianity. So in the West, we have a particular perspective on Mother Teresa. And what do you think some of the people who were subject to that conversion process and their families, what do you think they think? That we're going to withhold food and shelter and medical care unless you convert, for example. So, you know, the point I'm trying to make here, and the point that comes up in different, I mean, the reference I was using was with regards to Animal Farm, is that sometimes we just go along with what we're fed. Because we're consuming so much information, we're consuming so much opinion, and to some extent data, that it's too difficult for us often to figure out the difference between truth and untruth. And generally, we're not at the kind of extreme ends of a spectrum. We're generally somewhere in between the extreme ends. So even in the case of Gandhi and Mother Teresa, I don't think anyone can argue that they didn't do good, right? They did a huge amount of good, both of them. But the way that we typically kind of simplify things in our minds is we bias ourselves to the extreme ends of one or the other, because we want to categorize things, because that makes it easier for us to process. But that's generally not where truth lies. So that's why the Gita's perspective on how do we look at this, like how do we navigate this without going completely crazy in terms of how we're processing stuff, and how do we understand what free choice we're making in that process, separate to, I think you said it really nicely in the beginning, separate to influence and context. So you remember this film? What film is it? Inception. So the thing I loved about this film was this idea that, those of you who haven't seen it, the key theme here is that the ability to plant a seed in somebody's mind through their subconscious state, such that that person thinks it's their own idea. Yeah? So we think it's our own idea. This is the illusion of free will. I think I'm making a choice, but the seed was planted there by somebody else. I mean, this is the film. But they got the idea from somewhere. And the way that the Vedic philosophy talks about it is actors. So generally, when we think about ourselves and our role in society and what we're doing, we think we're the only actor. We think we're the only person making a decision, right? But the Gita says, you're not the only actor. There are other actors. So there's the obvious other actors, which are the people around us. Those are obvious. other actors, because they may be influencing our choices. But can you think of what other things might also be actors in the way that the Gita is using the word? Can you think what those might be? No one read the Gita, yeah? God, okay, so God is an actor. That's a slightly complicated one, just because, do you have a sense of what you mean by, how does God act? That maybe I can ask a question like that.
You could say permits.
Okay, so God's role in acting is permitting. Okay, all right, good, yep.
Nature, like natural disasters, all that stuff.
Okay, nature. Nature is an actor. Very good. So, natural disasters. Yep. Tradition. Okay, that's good. Yep. Anything else? Okay. So, the idea is, and we'll get into what those actors are. So, the point being that we're not the only actors, and therefore, we're not acting independently. An independent actor means there is no other actor, right? They're acting, and an independent choice means you made that choice without any other actor involved, because you made that choice without any other influence, okay? But the Gita is saying you're never the only actor. So you're not making a completely free choice in the sense of if you are in the material world, you're not making a completely free choice because you're not the only actor. There are other things acting here. So what are those other actors? So we're going to speak a little bit about, one of them is mentioned in terms of God's role as the permitter, the indwelling Paramatma. Different words are used, but essentially the person who is sanctioning action according to somebody's past actions and their what's open to them, where they are on the decision tree, okay? Allows them, provides them their options. But the other one was nature, right? And the way that the Gita describes nature is in gunas. So like, you've heard of karma. So karma is this idea of, people often think about it like destiny, like something like destiny, that you do an action, you get a reaction, and that reaction is predetermined. So that's not entirely the full scope of karma, but the idea is we can take it at that level for now. This idea that there is a consequence to every action. So that consequence to an action is coming. But there's this concept within the Gita called the gunas. And the gunas are what are called the modes of material nature. And they are essentially influences, they are conditioning, they are states of being that impose themselves upon us based upon what our previous choices were. And we're going to get into that. But it relates, hopefully you'll see, do you remember the slides about smoking and about social media and about, they are things which are feel like they are impelling us in a certain direction. So the thing is that free will is possible, but we'll get to how we can get to that space. Have you seen, so this is the mode of ignorance. See what's happening here? So the mode of ignorance is basically, it's going to go away, I don't care. It's got nothing to do with me. I've got no interest in this. Okay, it's not my problem. And other self-destructive behaviors, okay? Does this look familiar? You're familiar with this? No?
What's happening?
They just stick in their heads in the water because they don't want to know.
Ducks.
Oh, that's not the head, that's not.
My second session is about how to interpret slides. So this is sticking your head in the sand, or in the water in this case, okay? Does that feel familiar? You ever done that? Just wanting something to go away, can't be jacked to do anything about it? Okay, this is the mode of passion. You have to see the bottom right, otherwise you're not getting the picture. Okay, so this is about, I want it now, okay? I must have it, and I'll do anything it takes, and I don't care who gets in my way. That's the mode of passion, right? It's driven by that sense of greed and intensity. but it also has creativity attached to it. This sound familiar? Look familiar? Been there? Done that? The thing with passion is, ignorance is like, nothing, not much going on here. Okay? Watching TV, playing PlayStation, not much going on. Mode of passion is intense activity. But the thing is, it's fluctuating. It doesn't stay. It does this. So when you're in the mode of passion, there's extreme highs and extreme lows, and there's quick transitioning between them. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever felt that? Like when you really, really want something, it's a good time, you can sense passion arising. When you really want something, there's an intensity and you really try hard to get it. And then there's this moment of like building, and like you attain what you wanted, and then there's like a low. And there's like this constant cycle that we're constantly going through. And then there's goodness. Okay? So there's goodness, and goodness is about, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. It's not because I'm driven by like unrestrained desire. Okay? And you've thought it through carefully. It's well considered. It's based in knowledge. Okay? And you are okay to put in the hard work that's required to get the result. Now, these look very simplistic. They are not. The three primary colors look very simplistic. They are not. You get billions, unlimited number of colors from the three primary colors. Same way, the three modes of material nature can apply to any circumstance, any situation, any context, and the Gita gives a really rich understanding of how the three modes can, well, I haven't got so much time to get into the modes themselves, but they are a fascinating subject, a very powerful framework to navigate through life. So now we're going to use this to understand how it plays into free will and conscious choice and rising above just being a blind follower. Okay? Is this guy in this car? It's actually not India. I thought it was India, but it's not India. Because you can see when you go closer to the number plates, it's a different language. It's somewhere in the Far East. Is this person expressing their free will? Some nods. Nods? Mostly nods. What's the problem with him expressing his free will in this way?
It's
Breaking rules. Okay?
Disturbing of others.
Disturbing. But go a bit further. Okay.
He's lowering the free will of the other half.
Yeah, okay. So disturbing is one perspective, right? But actually what he's doing by his action is he's limiting the free will of other people. Can you see that? Now, if he's a police officer, is he still limiting the free will of others? Yes? But maybe less than if he wasn't a police officer. So why do you think that it plays out like that? Why is that? Why is it that it depends on what they're doing, who it is, why they're doing it? Because clearly we can see, right? He's breaking the rules here. There's a reason. So the question is, do rules increase or decrease free will? Do laws increase or decrease free will? You must do this. You must not do that. Is that increasing your free will or decreasing it? Yeah.
Depends which one. Like, do not kill.
Yeah.
Kind of increases your free will.
Do not kill
Each other.
do not kill each other is decreasing my free will because
No, but you won't be alive for about, like you'll be alive for about a year.
okay, put your hands up if you think the law that you must follow, that you what was it? How did you phrase it?
You must not kill.
You must not. The law that you must not kill each other. The law that you must follow. Put your hand up if you think it increases your free will. Okay, you're in the minority here. I can count 7 hands, 8 hands, maybe 9. Okay, put your hand up if you think it decreases your free will. It's a law you must follow. About equal. And how many of you didn't put your hand up? Put your hand up. Okay, so what's the answer? No. It's not black and white, right? It's not straightforward. It's not straightforward because at one level, it's true. You have to admit, it's limiting your free will. The fact that everybody drives on the left-hand side of the road and if you don't, you're going to get a ticket is limiting your free will. But what is the purpose of that limitation? To increase it. So the point here is that you're trying to maximize free will. In the process of maximizing free will, you're going to have to limit some of it. Does that make sense? Because if you just maximize it to an absolute and have no laws, what is going to happen?
Chaos.
Anarchy, right? Chaos. And then nobody has free will. Almost none. I mean, you're going to get like a survival of the fittest thing going on and whatever, right? So this is the purpose of why, this idea of why rules or laws are there to maximize free will when they are properly intended, to maximize free will. So that's why when we look at goodness, passion, and ignorance, what's happening here is that whilst goodness, remember what we said about goodness, is that it requires self-discipline. It requires doing the hard work to get the result, rather than the mode of passion, which is driven intensely by greed. So what's happening in goodness is you're introducing degrees of contemplation, knowledge acquisition, self-discipline. Now those look like rules, they look like laws, they look like restrictions. They don't look like just go out and enjoy yourself. But they're there to increase your free will. They're there in the same way that limitations are introduced in society to enable free will, not to limit your free will. And that's why the mode of goodness is what it's saying at its core is that as you rise to goodness, your free will is maximized. Whereas in ignorance, where you're following no rules and laws pretty much, your free will is minimized. Now that's counterintuitive for most people. Because most people think, just let me do what I want. That's free will. I'll do whatever the hell I want, to whoever I want, and that's free will. But is it? So why is it that free will is why is it that do you think now that you've seen, kind of seen this overview, why is it that free will is maximized in goodness and not in ignorance? Why is it, why do you think that might be? Yeah.
Because within goodness, you have more of a, I guess, capacity to make a choice either way. Like you can make, I guess, a good choice or a bad choice. Whereas if you're in ignorance,
why do you have more capacity?
Because you've already built those habits and like you've built like a foundation with the knowledge and like all of, and the self-discipline that allows you to make that acts as a platform for you to make the choice.
Why does it allow you? Sorry, I'm pushing you just because I like the responses you're giving. So why do you think that you're able to do that? As in, why are you in a better position there? Because you said beyond.
If you have more understanding of like a scenario and you have the discipline to maybe make what seems like a harder choice, then even though that is the harder choice, which may seem like it's limiting your free will, the fact that you have that choice means that you have more free will in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I was going to say it's more selfless because you're thinking about the consequences more so than it was for in ignorance. Because whereas ignorance is all about me, whereas for goodness you're also thinking about what the repercussion of the decision could be.
Okay. Yeah. So you're taking into account repercussions, consequences. Okay. Anything else? Let me ask you a question. Where does free will come from? What has free will? Desires have free will, okay. And what has desires? The person. And what is the person? Sorry, the what? The carrier of the soul. Okay, so in religious language it would be the soul. Okay. So that's where you would get to in terms of the person. Okay, fine. So what, anyone else? What possesses free will? Whereas when we say, I have free will, what are we saying?
I think anything that has the mental capacity to understand the consequences of what they're going to choose to do.
Nice, I like that. So something that has the mental capacity to understand the consequences of that choice. So you would say animals don't have free will?
Yeah, that's what I was going to lead on. I was going to say animals as well.
Animals as well what?
Like they also, if they have the ability to comprehend what's going to happen if they do something, then they're free will by them.
Okay. Do you think animals do?
Yeah.
To some degree? Yeah. Okay. At the back?
Yeah, just the ability to reason.
Ability to reason. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So where I'm going with this is, I think we all accept that this microphone does not have free will. Are we happy with that? Okay. And we accept that we all as individuals have free will. The difference between me and the microphone, no Saki comments, but one clear difference is around consciousness. Yeah? So consciousness in terms of what is the source of consciousness, that source of whether it's in an animal or a human being, that consciousness is what's expressing or not expressing free will. That consciousness is where desire ultimately comes from. There's stuff in between which we'll get onto maybe in another session. But if consciousness has free will, where is consciousness most expressed? And this is the point around moving from ignorance to passion to goodness. This is the elevation of consciousness. This is the expression of consciousness. Because if you are operating in ignorance, there's not a lot of consciousness being expressed. Just as in the sense of animals and are not expressing a whole lot of consciousness. They're expressing certainly consciousness, but at a different level than human beings are able to express. But many human beings operate on a stimulus-response basis. Okay, so where consciousness is not being expressed freely, it's been driven by context, circumstance, habit, conditioning, others, etc. Right? That's living close to how an animal lives. That's why rising from ignorance to passion to goodness is the fulfillment of the expression of free will. And my point here is really just about, the Gita gives us a system. It tells us the system, the world in which we live is a system, it has actors, and you are not alone. And if you look at what's going on the left-hand side, you've got complex determinism and others. Like, so we have like this idea that there's just like a deterministic world driven by science with no free will. Because that's what determinism means. If you live just on the basis of chemistry, there's no free will being expressed, right? Chemicals don't have free will. So that limits our free will because that's the world we're living in. And then the loss of control and unpredictable future. That's the kind of world we live in and occupy. And that's why so many people feel like they don't have control of their life. They don't have control of their context. They don't know how to actually engage with and influence themselves, like influence their situation, because they feel out of control. They feel it's not predictable, and that leads to all kinds of like very challenging circumstances when you feel disempowered in that way. And that's why Krishna is giving us this idea that there's other things at play. There is karma at play. There are the gunas or the modes that we talked about at play. There are these things which are acting separate to you, but on you, with you, behind you, right? They're these things which are acting. And when you can then use the modes to help rise through from ignorance to passion to goodness, you can now start expressing your own free will. Much more. You can now start taking control and gaining control of your context and situation and being able to predict what's going to happen in the future. So I'm going to start wrapping up now. We You know, about 20 years ago, have any of you been to the sales on Oxford Street during like the Christmas sales? Have you any of you been on Oxford Street? You have, yeah? Okay, many of you. So I went once, it was, I don't know, whatever, 15, 20 years ago, I can't remember. And it was like, I thought, I mean, you know, you just go, I mean, you think you're gonna experience whatever you think you're gonna experience. And my experience coming out of it was, I never ever want to go back again. The amount of, like, I mean, just forget all the number of people that are there. There's a principle at which the amount of choice leads to a reduction in choice. So like, if you put so many choices in front of somebody, it becomes so confusing that it's hard to make a choice. Have you ever experienced that? Like you become almost paralyzed. And you realize like the constant, not just the search, but the elevation of increasing our choices to the highest thing that we could achieve is a fool's game. Like the idea that the best thing that we can do in life is to increase all of our choices to an unlimited degree, it's just not true. It's the same way as saying, maximize my free will all the way to the absolute and have no laws or anything in place. It's the same idea. It doesn't work. It's not the way the world is built. And so therefore, like, you know, what happens is when we have consciousness that we spoke about, that consciousness requires something. And that something is, that consciousness requires something to focus on. Consciousness requires something to be conscious of. Right? So what happens is, if you don't have something of meaning to focus on, if you don't have something substantial to direct your consciousness towards, what's going to happen? What are you going to do? You're going to focus on the most irrelevant, inconsequential, pointless nonsense because your consciousness has to focus on something. You heard that saying, like, don't sweat the small stuff? I mean, you're going to be sweating the small stuff all day long, all your life, if you don't have something substantial to focus your consciousness on. And, you know, when I was your age, or close to, the temple was being shut down by the government. So the government wanted to shut the temple down, and I was 18, and it was the most amazing thing. Like, it was the most amazing thing to be able to focus entirely on something worthy, on something substantial. It was like, you can imagine, right? In teenage years, everybody wants to revolt. Everyone wants to revolt against something. So if you're not revolting against your parents or your religion or society or the politics of the day or whatever it is, right? There's a coming of age where somebody wants to revolt. And for me, and for a lot of young people who joined the campaign at that time, we were revolting against the government. It's fantastic. It's like the best thing ever. So it's like stuff you dream of, like being able to, like, we had a protest march in London, shut down Parliament Square for like an hour or two with 40,000 people. And I mean, it was awesome. But that context doesn't exist right now. That was an easy thing to latch onto. And what I want to end with is by saying that please think about this point around what free will is, what your conscious choice is, how do you express it, and please think about the possibility of having something substantial in your life, something meaningful, that you can direct your consciousness towards to help you move away from focusing on stuff that really is just going to be a distraction, and ultimately it's just going to be unhealthy for you because it's going to drive you towards habits and behaviors which are not driven out of free will, they're driven out of just conditioning. And you're just like being driven, like a herd going along with the herd without really making much of a free choice at all. And that requires consciousness. That requires your conscious endeavor. So please think about that. And with that, I will stop. I thought I was going to speak for 45 minutes and take questions. I'm well over that time. So I'm just going to stop and hand over to the team.